Well, as we just heard from Barnaby Joyce, any ending of a parliamentary year is pretty frantic, but as Barnaby said, today was particularly frantic in Canberra. Joining me now, the Australian Financial Review's political editor, Phil Coorey. Why the mad rush, Phil? They've had all year to do all this stuff.
It's a good question, Steve. I can't remember a day quite like this where 30 plus bills have just gone through in one day. I mean, I think the last time we were here, a few weeks ago, the Senate passed one bill in 2 weeks. So I think part of it's on the government, but part of it's also on the Senate. It tends not to do a lot until it has to. But look, having said that, the government's pretty much got what it wanted. I mean, most of the bills, today were what we call rats and mice stuff. There was, sort of half a dozen or so of significance, but the rest of it was stuff that was largely uncontentious. But look, I just, I think from the government's point of view, it's probably helped them a bit, certainly lifted their spirits. Good way to finish the parliamentary year by getting most of your agenda through. But, I'm sure it did look pretty scrappy out there. Certainly this morning it did for anyone who was bothering to pay attention.
Well, I guess politically, Phil, what it does at least give them is, at the start of next year, something to sell. I mean, when you talk about the social media change, which I believe was on that guillotine bill, you got those immigration changes as well, so they can start to put a message out next year saying, look, the coalition always says we're weak on borders and immigration. Well, we've put this bill through, we're not weak on that. Politically, is that the advantage they've got by doing that all together in one go today?
Well, certainly. I mean, there was a view, Steve, that if they didn't get some of the stuff up, the signature stuff like the housing bills and the future made in Australia, then they'd go to the election and beat the Greens and the coalition on the head and saying, look, they blocked these vital things. But I suspect, as you said there, I suspect their preference was to get them through so they could say they're actually doing them rather than they still want to do them, because it does hurt a government not to be able to get its legislation through. So definitely, I'm pretty sure we'll be back probably for a couple of weeks next year in February. I don't think we'll be here much beyond that before we go to the polls, but certainly allows them to spend over summer, the weeks over summer, to say, look at all the things we have done and are about to do. And it's, it's not just a wish list now, it's actually concrete. I bumped into the Prime Minister just after question time today, actually. He was pretty happy. Happiest I've seen him for a while.
A lot of it is social issues, but we know cost of living is still going to be the biggest issue. You read the quotes from Jerry Harvey, who runs Harvey Norman, where people are going buying TVs and toasters. He says we're headed to a big black hole of debt. If you were Jim Chalmers or Anthony Albanese, that would not be helpful, would it?
No, it's not. And we sort of tend to forget that. I think one of the problems with the pandemic, Steve, is we lost our fear of debt and deficit in this country. Which we had a healthy respect for it, from the Howard years onwards. The government talks about the two surpluses they delivered, which they did do, but that was last financial year and the year before. And as of now, we're back in deficit, and we're back in deficit big time. And we're going to be that way for the next decade. And I suspect, it sort of underpins my theory I've had probably since the May budget. That's why we won't do another budget before the next election. The government's penciled one in for March the 25th. Which is early, and then they would call an election after that for May. I would be very surprised if they do that. I suspect they'll call the election just after the WA election in March, and then we'll be going to the polls around April 12. That's my theory. Because why would you want to do another budget? Because you're just going to be hanging a lantern over this massive sort of black hole. And don't forget, they're going to spend a bit of dough between now and election day. They've been talking about introducing universal childcare, and if that's not handled properly, that's another NDIS in the making, and you're going to lay that into it. It's all going to be borrowed money. We've done the student debt thing the other week. They're not going to be worried about spending dough to try and buy votes, especially as they're in a bit of strife in the polls. So, I'm not sure whether we'll see another budget. It'd be a pretty desperate government if they had to go to another budget.
Yeah, you look at it, it does seem to be falling in the coalition's favour. I mean, just last week we had a report suggesting living standards have not fallen as fast as they have during Labor's term in office since the 1950s. Then yesterday, as you just mentioned there, Phil, $42 billion turnaround in the budget from those surpluses to these deficits. it's a pretty simple argument for the other mob to make that Labor still can't, handle money.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's always been a perceived weakness to be the coalition. If you look at the polls, Stephen, including the one we do in the Financial Review by the Freshwater Group, the coalition now has double-digit leads on Labor of all these issues of which party do you prefer to manage these issues, and if it's economic management, cost of living, Dutton's sort of 12, 15, 18 points ahead on a lot of these things. So, look, it's not a unique problem to the Australian government, as we sort of learned when we were overseas last week with the PM. There are all these governments sitting around at the G20 and APEC, and they're all suffering the scourge of incumbency, as we're calling it, because inflation just kills governments before you factor in anything else. And, they have done quite a bit, this government, in terms of trying to help. But you ask people out in the street and they'll probably tell you they haven't done anything. They've forgotten about the tax cuts and the power bill discounts and all those sorts of things. So it's a bit of a mug's game being in government at the moment, and I think that's before you even factor in, whether you're a Labor or a Liberal government.
Look forward to your end-of-year summary in the Fin Review tomorrow, Phil. Thanks for your help today.
Appreciate it, Steve. See you.